So just to give a bit of context, we are situated here in Holbury, as has been noted. It's a sort of a backland site, as you can see there. There was previously a dwelling that was situated here, but we'll get into that in more detail in a second. That's just to give a wider shot of the surrounding area. So you can see here the site was previously vacant. Open land with a sort of a dwelling here that was where this access is now situated. Now, some of you may remember back in June 2023, consent was granted by this committee for a redevelopment of the site, including the demolition of the building here and the creation of a number of dwellings in this back plot here, including a number of detached properties and a number of semi-detached properties. So this consent was granted. Just to give a bit of context on the sort of buildings we're looking at here, this is the sort of detached and semi-detached built form. Following the grant of that consent, there was a bit of sort of remeasuring that happened on site, and an amendment to that planning application came in, just to slightly change the layout and form of some of the buildings and developments on site. You can see there, this is the new proposed development. This application wasn't referred to committee for determination and was granted consent at a delegated level. The officer's report goes into a bit more detail on the sort of differences between the two schemes. As you can see there, the actual form of the buildings is relatively similar. It was just some minor changes to the form and design of the buildings. Unfortunately, as they went to build out the development, the developer found that the measurements they'd got from the site still weren't quite accurate. So when they actually went out to build the development, the measurements didn't quite line up. And what has been partially constructed on site, they're still in the process of finishing the works, is different from both approved consents. So the application before you today is effectively to try and regularise the existing development that has been partially constructed on site. So to go into a bit more detail about what the key changes are, this is the current site plan that you've got in front of us. One of the key differences you will note is there is a much narrower gap between these buildings here. Part of the reason that is particularly significant in this case is because they were originally relying on those gaps between the buildings to provide access to the rear for refuse and cycle storage, where now the gaps between those buildings are sufficiently narrow that we don't think that that's feasible. So as an alternative, a suite of refuse and cycle storage has been proposed within this area to the frontage of the site, to try and address that issue. Just to give you some indications of the new proposed built form on the site, this is the detached buildings. Again, as the specifics of the differences are laid out in more detail in the report, but the sort of key changes are the buildings are a bit lower, and obviously, as I said, the gaps between the buildings have been narrowed. Obviously, the application is now being considered partially retrospectively. We'll see some photos of the state of the site in a second. So we can be reasonably confident at this stage that what is on the plans is what we are looking to sort of have the final word on. So this is just some details of the refuse and cycle storage, so you just get an idea of what the visual appearance of those will be. Basically, timber-clad enclosed structures. This is from the street scene. You can see there the final form of those buildings in the background there through the access. As you can see here, the building that was here to be demolished has already been demolished and made good. This is just a bit of some interior shots of the site. You can see here some of the paving's gone in already. I believe this work's continued since these site photos were taken, and this is where those refuse and cycle storage will go in along this boundary here. This is just to give an indication of this is the one end of the site, and this is the gap between the buildings. Just to give an indication of sort of what that relationship is and how that works. And this is just some shots of the rear, just to give, again, a feel for the surrounding area and how the site's situated and laid out. So for the reasons we've laid out in the report, we think the key issues remain very similar to the previously consented schemes on the site. While there have been some changes between the proposed development and the as constructed and the existing developments that were already approved, we do feel that the similarities are sufficient that the scheme should be recommended for approval in line with those previous consents. There were a number of conditions imposed on the previous consents. Given the stage of development we're at, some of those conditions have either already been discharged or are no longer relevant. So we've proposed a reduced suite of conditions to reflect the stage that development is currently at. And we would recommend that the application is conditionally approved on this basis. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Mr. Nicholas Barnes, who's objecting, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My main objection is the land level adjacent to my property. The entire property of the first building is raised by 300 mil, which is now imposing onto my gravel boards. Mr. Fanning states in his report that the land levels have only been slightly raised in some places. The first property is approximately, including the back garden and the driveway, is approximately 35 metres by the whole width of the building. That is completely raised by 300 mil plus, which is my main concern. I've spoken with the manufacturers of the gravel boards that I have used to separate my garden with the building. They state that the gravel boards are not of a structural design, so any weights being pushed on one side will and have already cracked some of those boards. So the other concern that I have, who is supposed to pay for these replacements and do the work from as of now and of the future when they all do crack eventually. My simple resolution to this would be for the builder to build a foundation wall between my gravel boards and the garden, which would take the strain off of my gravel boards. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Members, questions either for the officers or for our objector? Councillor Dowd.
Remembering back to the previous time, there were issues raised about whether or not the turning circle would be suitable for things like refuse vehicles, and it was in the report. It said that was fine. It accommodated that. I don't see any revisiting of that because that was before the new storage was put in. So do we know whether or not that's had an impact on the turning circle for larger vehicles, particularly with sort of parking and other issues that were raised? Thank you.
That is something that we asked the applicant to look at and provide some drawings which have been looked at by the council's highways, the Hampshire County Council's highways team, and they've raised no objection to the amendments to the scheme. As you can see there, the previous scheme incorporated parking spaces in this location, so that obviously wouldn't have been factored into the turning circle on the previous development. So that, from that point of view, I think the arrangement in terms of the availability of turning circles would be very similar to the previously consented schemes.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. In 2026, the Waterside, along with that section of the New Forest, will be gaining wheelie bins. Are those bin stores enough to take into account all the wheelie bins that each of those properties is likely to have? Because it doesn't look big enough. Because there's a significant number of wheelie bins each property is going to have. It's 2, isn't it? Plus the other thing. So is that big enough for all of those?
So the council has a waste management and new facilities, new resident development technical guidance note. The way because as you rightly say, the change to wheelie bins does have an impact on sort of how we provide refuse storage for properties. Unfortunately, in this case, as you say, the provision of a large number of individual wheelie bins would present quite an issue in terms of accommodating it on the site frontage. So the approach that's been taken in this case is similar to a flatter development where we've taken the approach of having a communal bin store approach. So there's going to be a sort of large scale sort of dumper style refuse storage solution. So that's why we've got the the guidance for those is laid out on a per sort of 5 dwelling basis. So the storage that we've got proposed on site is proposed to accommodate for up to 10 dwellings, effectively the capacity in accordance with a sort of flattered style development arrangement where we've got those communal bin arrangements. Obviously, we do recognise that ideally we would prefer to have a individual storage solution, but the gaps between the properties simply aren't sufficient to accommodate for that. And as you say, our concern was that trying to fit that all on the frontage of the site was going to have a very significant impact otherwise. So that's why we've taken the approach that we have.
Chairman, it was my understanding that when we started this process of changing in waste, that it will be a requirement for all developments to be able to have the appropriate storage for the new wheelie bins, and it was a flat, which is obviously couldn't do that because people at multiple level. So how come we are not adopting that approach with this ground floor development?
The short answer is if we try to accommodate for the full suite of refuse storage on the site, that would dominate the entire frontage of the site. So the balance that we struck here was we felt that this was a reasonable solution that provided the facilities necessary for the proposed residential occupiers while still providing a reasonable visual quality of development.
Does that mean that for all future developments we're going to adopt that liberal approach?
I'd say it will always be taken on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the specific circumstances in an individual site are and how that development works in terms of the arrangement and the ideal solution.
Councillor Criso.
Can I just get the timing right? When I had an extension, I had building regs coming out every 5 minutes to check that I was an inch here or an inch there. How come we've got to this position where we've got all these places slammed in there with no spaces between them before somebody says, hang on a minute, this is wrong?
I mean, I can't speak to the exact sort of timings of sort of how that all happened. All I can say is obviously when they did start to get constructed, this did get referred to our enforcement team. Obviously, as you can tell by the timelines, the original consent was only granted in 2023, and then that was the middle of 2023, and then the amended consent was at the end of 2023. And then obviously this application has been with us for a little while because we were working to try and make sure that we could get as much information up front as we could, given the stage of the development we're at. We didn't want further discharge of conditions going on. So the developers obviously moved quite rapidly. It did come to our enforcement team's attention when the development wasn't built as constructed, and that's why we've got the current application in front of us to try and regularise the situation.
Councillor Sleep.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. First of all, looking at this latest plan, we've got, it looks like 5 parking spots against the original one, which was, how many was it on the original drawing? Can you show me? There was 3 on the front, there's 4. Okay, so they've shown double bays in front of some of the 3 beds. So you could possibly get 2 cars on the new development. That was the first thing. So there's not much change on the bays provided for that number of houses, is there, for visitors?
No. So
That's 4.
yeah, you can see that, and
That's 2, 4, 5.
yeah, these have normally been.
If they're
allocated.
if they are double width,
Yeah.
which possibly they might be.
So yeah, if you can refer to page 10 of the report, the parking breakdown is laid out there in a bit more detail. We originally had 22 parking spaces, which included the sort of 6 across that frontage here. And then we're now looking at 19, of which there are these three identified as visitor parking. I will say the scheme remains sort of policy compliant with our recommended standard.
If I may, one more, Chairman. It seems that we're presented here with a fait accompli anyway, but if there'd been an original arrangement, as we discussed, if those gaps were up through those properties before, we had the bins obviously planned to be in the back gardens, didn't we? That's where they were going to be. So that every house would have been wheeling their bins through along the sides of their properties into the forecourt area to be collected. That's how it was originally, wasn't it?
Yes, so the previous arrangement did propose to have both refuse and cycle storage within the rear plots, utilising the accesses to the rear.
Okay, Councillor Brand.
I just wanted to understand the gentleman's issue a bit further. Which house was?
I'm number 22.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm number 22, and my main concern is the first bungalow on the left-hand side. The whole building is raised by 300 mil, which is now pushing against my gravel boards.
Thank you.
Councillor Richards.
So then would it be possible as part of the planning permission to require a wall to be built, as you suggested would be a solution?
So if you aren't satisfied with the landscaping solution on the site, you could, if you were minded to do so, recommend a condition to require further discharge of landscaping details. Obviously, we have a proposed landscaping scheme, but again, if you're not satisfied with that, then that is something that you could consider if you wish to do so.
But is that to include construction of a retention wall along that side?
No, so the current landscaping scheme just says that they are going to use the existing fence along that boundary. So basically, what you can see there, they're just proposing to retain that.
That was what you were referring to, yeah.
But thank you, Chair. As I said, we're presented with a fait accompli here. It just astonishes me that dimensions were missed on the original construction, and it's changed so much. If we had one building presented to us on this planning committee that had been built off plan, we'd have been kicking off immensely about it. Now we've got a situation where we've got an estate built off plan, which really astonishes me that we've got this far with this development before anything's been actually raised to us about it. It just seems very strange to me. I can just see these properties with bins all along the front. It would be an absolute shambles by the look of it now. And it's fait accompli. It seems that we can't do anything about it. If we turn around now and said, pull the lot down because it's just not practical, where do we stand on that? It's been built. So it all seems to me as if it's been built off plan, which I find amazing.
Councillor Cressell, did you have your hand up?
Yes, can I?
Okay, Councillor Dan.
Thank you. I'm taking up the point from my colleagues here about this Mr. Barnes' objection. We have, I'm sure, as councillors, all have tales of misery where runoff from higher properties causes untold problems for neighbours and things like that. So, taking the point that this is what appears to be a fait accompli, I think the least we can do is to ensure that the people who've lived in the surrounding area are protected from runoff by proper enforcement of a decent boundary so that they don't have that problem going forward. So if we can include that, please, in the conditions, then I would like to see that as a condition. Thank you.
Can we include that as a condition?
It's the least they can do.
Yeah.
Chairman, maybe I can help advise the committee. Having just had a quick look at the drawing from the case officer next to me, the issue arises, I think, when you look at the plan on the screen. It's number 22, which you can see to the bottom of that plan, bottom left-hand corner, coming along the edge of, I call it plot 1, the first house you get to on the left as you enter the site. And it's we've heard from the speaker a dwelling of maybe 35 metres and 300 mil in terms of a retaining feature. Notwithstanding the advice you were given by the case officer a minute ago about planning conditions, I'm just a little bit nervous that might result in operational development, the building of a wall, something that needs a planning permission in its own right, and it's not on the drawings at the moment. So to my mind, rather than perhaps secure that by condition, if it's something you want to see and you think there's demonstrable harm in the absence of that, it might be one where we go back to the applicant and make sure that that's something that can be delivered, because there's clearly going to be implications for the extent that development has been undertaken so far. And they need to be able to perhaps survey that part of the site, make sure that they can get in and that's something that can actually be built and delivered. And I wouldn't want to add a condition on without knowing that there's some certainty about it being delivered.
Councillor Brand, were you going along the same line there? You had your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the building regs, like Councillor Crizel said. I can't believe, when building regs go along, surely they should be checking that the foundations and everything have been built to the plan that is there. So I'd like to see, not that anything we can do today, but the council as NFDC have something where building regs actually talk to planning and look at what is supposed to be being built properly, and if it's not being built properly, that it's flagged up straight away. And if you can't build a wall on this house, then perhaps that house should come down. Leave 5, take one down. They've not followed the rules at all, have they, to any part of this? And it's just it's not right.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to be honest, the developer who built this doesn't leave us with any great confidence, because it's clearly it's not gone according to plan. It's not appropriate because so many things are wrong. I want to get back to the drainage thing. While we can't request them building a wall, can we make a condition that the developer puts in appropriate drainage from his garden so as not to affect the neighbouring properties? And planning permission is dependent on that being in place, because that will then leave it to the developer to sort out something to stop it affecting the residents' property.
So for context, on the previous consents, there were a requirement to construct a sustainable urban drainage system, which has been implemented on site. So that includes sort of drainage within these gardens here, and this hard surfacing here has all been constructed of a permeable structure, and you saw earlier the substrate that was being laid beneath the thing to allow drainage from that site. So from that point of view, there shouldn't, in theory, be a substantive increase in the sort of surface water drainage associated with the development. Obviously, there will be some increase associated with the additional sort of roofing and the like that's gone on, but the design, at least, hopefully has dealt with that through the sustainable urban drainage system that's already been installed on site. We don't have a condition on that as part of the current application because, as I said, it's already been installed and is in situ on site. So.
Can I just query on page 12 under drainage? While the drainage solutions to the frontage of the site have not been fully implemented, given the need to amend the layout. So the drainage at the front of the site.
So the previous drainage solution that was conditioned and consented, there was a landscaping, obviously changes to the landscaping. Part of that included drainage solutions below trees. Those trees have now been relocated or moved within the site, so that's why that has not been implemented. You can see there was some indicative tree planting here, and there was previously a drainage solution proposed within their roots, whereas that is not part of the current landscaping proposals. As you can see here, that this this was still in the process of construction at the time.
I've got hands going up everywhere at the moment, so I have got a list. Councillor Crizell, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose that we reject this planning and use it as the grounds for amenity, the fact that that person's being affected by the level of the land and the fact it needs to be readdressed before we agree it. Yes. Yes. Excuse me.
Carry on with the debate. Councillor Hawkins, I've got up here.
Thank you very much. I'm utterly amazed that it's even got this far. I mean, the developer is nothing but a greedy monkey, because really it's cramped and contrived on a very small space. Anybody supposed to be living there, it's like living in a hen hatch. You're going to park all those cars in there and wheelie bins for waste. The lorry going down and to empty them is going to struggle, especially if there are all the cars there and they get there early. I think it was ridiculous putting that number of properties on there, and we should never allow it to have got this far.
We did vote for it. We did grant it when it came to us before.
I can't see why we ever did get it.
We did. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. We've got...
It might be a moot point now, but a couple of things. I'm a little bit concerned about any solution that is based on drainage alone, because we have so many issues with poorly done drainage. But I'm also concerned, we've talked about number 22 quite rightly, but there are also properties, I believe, to the rear, as we see. So should we get to the stage where this goes through and we're talking about mitigating any kind of runoff from the raised property, we also need to look at the rear of the property as well, because that's not been discussed. And my concern is, if you simply mitigate it in one area, it then exacerbates it in another area. So that it has to take into account the extent of the plot. But we might not get to that stage this morning if it's refused. Thank you. But should it come again, I think we've got to look at that. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Chairman, having been on this committee a few years, we've come across other developments where the developer comes along with a planning for drainage and a reason comes up why he can't do it, so he does something else. And what happens? Residents around it start to have flooded gardens, flooded properties and so forth. There are so many mistakes in this development, it does not leave me with confidence that the solution will be right for the residents around it, or indeed the people who are going to live in there, which is why I support the objection. This needs to be looked at properly, and appropriate, proper solutions put in place that do not have a negative effect on people that live around it and the future people who live in it. And clearly drainage is an issue.
Councillor Sleep.
Chair, can I just ask, if we took up Councillor Crizell's suggestion that we refuse, does that go back through planning? The reason we're refusing is because we're concerned about the drainage on the back of the properties and the side of the properties. Would that be an object that they could come back to us and say, well, we will correct that before we continue? I mean, is that how it works? Or, you know, that seems a logical way. It's fait accompli, but it seems a logical way of protecting the neighbour.
Chairman, if I can help on this point, I think there's a couple of points. If members are minded to recommend refusal and you refuse it, you've made your decision on the application, it would be refused. I've got notes to come back and ask further questions about your actual reasons for refusal and your policy basis for that, but we can deal with that if we get to that point. The applicant clearly would have a right of appeal against that refusal. So we need, again, to be able to evidence the harm in our reason for refusal, and whether that goes to just number 22 or whether it looks at other properties, you can be precise and specific in any reason should we get there. To my mind, You've had the history explained to you and you've been taken through that by the case officer. You have an ongoing construction site, which is reasonably close to completion. To my mind, it might be a better alternative, as I suggested, rather than use conditions, that we take this back away from committee, have further dialogue with the applicant and come up with a solution to make sure, A, the drainage that we've approved previously is fit for purpose and it's going to deal with surface water on the site, and specifically to look at the boundary alongside number 22. We could look to secure further details rather than by planning condition, and then maybe bring the item back before you when we've resolved those points. That might be a different way to deal with it, rather than perhaps look at refusal, potential appeals, and the process that follows, and it might be slightly more expedient and quicker to resolve it that way.
So are you saying that we refer it now back and explain the problems while we're bouncing it back to them to get it sorted? It's not our position to decide whether we want to live in those properties. I mean, I wouldn't. There's no way in a million years. But if people want to live in them, that's fine. But it is our concern, now it's built, that we protect the neighbours around that property.
Sorry.
Sorry, your officers have looked at the report and are satisfied that the amenity of the neighbours will be protected. We've done that over the last 2 applications and have come to the view in the report that's before you, hence the recommendation is one that's favourable. If you come to a different view, you're entitled to do that as the decision maker and as the planning authority. My advice to you, though, is it's probably better, quicker and cleaner, if I can use that description, for us to take this away in the life of the application, given the extent of the development on site, and try and work with the applicant to resolve the issues, perhaps rather than refuse it, appeal. They could then go away and try and fix issues and come back and you get a new application and we have to do and rehearse everything again, whereas this way we can take further details. It could be we take further details and we reconsult on those details so that neighbours and third parties get the chance to comment, and then we come back to you. There's a number of things we can do, but I would suggest you've got the motion on the floor for refusal and that's been seconded, but as an alternative for you to consider, deferral might be another matter for you.
I would be minded to defer this, so I need to come back to you, Councillor Cosell. Councillor Wade. Okay. So that would be the recommendation. But if we finish debate, I'll come back to Mr. Barnes. You have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you very much. The main thing I would like to point out, which I sent some photographs in right at the beginning of this, before the builder got in there, all of the ground level was the same level. He has risen this ground level and created this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now the advice is to recommend deferral. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Dowd, are you proposing?
I'm happy to propose deferral, Chair.
And seconder, Councillor Wade? Okay, so we're voting to defer. Proposed by Councillor Dowd and seconded by Councillor Wade. All of those in favour, please raise your hands. So sorry. Start again. We move on to application 24/10792 on page 19 of the agenda. The scaffolding yard, the old brickyard, Salisbury Road.
Can we just have interest? Is it
Did we have interest on this?
Joe?
Joe Riley? Yeah, okay. Have 2 speakers on this one, Mr. Jerry Davis, the agent, and Miss Jane Reid, the objector. But first of all, we'll go over to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this application sits in Copythorne off Salisbury Road. We've, just to give you a bit of a wider context for where the site is here, this is the New Forest Park Authority here, so we're close to that boundary. You can see here on this map, I'll just highlight the nearest residential properties just for consideration later. So we've got one property here and one property here. So just keep those in mind when we're looking at the plans later on. So you can see here, this site has operated for a number of years historically as a scaffolding yard. So there's a parking area to the front here with the access here-ish. So they come in here, go around here, and this is where the majority of the scaffolding is stored. So the site does operate, as I said, historically as a scaffolding yard without a number of conditions or restrictions on its operation. However, a number of years ago, a larger scaffolding rack structure was erected, and as part of the application to grant consent for that structure, a number of conditions were imposed on the operation of the site. The current application relates to the reconstruction of that previous structure, which was dismantled due to the safety of the structure coming into question and reconstructed. As laid out in the report, the reconstruction slightly enlarged the structure. The footprint remained broadly the same, but the ridge height here went up by about 0.4 metres, and the eaves height here went up by about 0.1 metres. So there was a slight increase in height of the structure. The structure, as I said, otherwise remained broadly the same. You can see here it's open on this side with cladding on this side, these sides. The cladding has currently only been partially reinstalled on the new structure, but will be completed following the grant of consent, the applicant has said, because this came to our, the attention of our enforcement team, and we've got the application in front of us now. So just to provide a little bit of context, there are some floodlights proposed on the structure, and this is just a sort of a diagram to show the light spill. So just keep in mind that in context of the neighbouring property as well. So just to give a bit more detail on the context of the site, you can see here, this is the site entrance, this is the car parking area, and this is that structure that the application in question is for today. You can see there the partial cladding that's been installed on the structure as it stands. Just to give a bit more context as well, there is a listed structure on the site mentioned in the report, which is in the, sorry, I say on the site, it's technically outside the application site, but within the wider context of the scaffolding sort of land. So there's that structure in disrepair. We haven't had any objection from the conservation officer in terms of the visual impact associated with that development. This is the scaffolding rack in question, which we'll get a slightly better shot of here. You can see here there are a number of existing smaller sort of scaffolding structure areas in storage going on, but this is the one in question that we are looking at today that the application relates to. So this is the structure that has been slightly increased in height. Just to give a bit more context, this is looking over towards that residential property and that over here. So that's just a bit of context. As you turn round into the scaffolding area, this is those angles of view. So the general position that we've adopted is that the impacts of the structure will remain similar to the existing, and it will be well set back from other nearby residential properties. We have looked to reimpose the suite of conditions that were imposed on the original structure to ensure that the impacts remain similar in terms of the context of the existing operation of the site. So we don't think that there is any substantive intensification of use of the site associated with the amendments to the design or alteration. And on that basis, we recommended the application be conditionally approved. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
I do apologise. Sorry.
Sorry.
I realised there was an update that I was going to give. The Parish Council did write in since the publication of the report, just to reiterate their concerns with the proposal and ask that the application be refused. But they did also say that if the committee was minded to grant consent, then they requested that additional visits and maintenance to the site was undertaken by the council to make sure that the conditions were being complied with, and to confirm compliance with the conditions that were being imposed. Sorry for that. Thank you.
Mr Davis.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you, as you've heard, is essentially for the same structure you approved previously back in 2010. As your report notes, it's slightly higher by some 10 centimetres at the front and 40 centimetres at the rear, but these differences are so marginal as to be immaterial in terms of visual or other impact, and I'll come back to that shortly. The application is also supported by an acoustic appraisal and a lighting appraisal. The acoustic appraisal concludes that the structure will have the same acoustic properties as the previous one, primarily because it's made of the same materials. There will be no reduction then in the acoustic properties of the structure compared to its predecessor. The lighting strategy confirms that the lighting is well within the tolerances that would be expected to serve a development of this nature. Indeed, it confirms that a case for additional lighting could be made, but the applicant is content to have only minimal lighting, and that is a reasonable and considerate approach in the circumstances. The lighting appraisal also confirms that it is based on a worst-case scenario of there being no intervening fences or trees or other vegetation between the site and the nearest residential property. Of course, in reality, there are such intervening features which will reduce any lighting impact still further. The conclusions of both the acoustic report and the lighting report have been assessed and accepted by the Council's Environmental Health Officer. There is simply no evidence then that either of these aspects of the development would give rise to quantifiable material harm. Returning to the slight increase in height of the structure, this simply could not, as has been alleged by the neighbour to the north, lead to overlooking into their property. The side of the structure, as you've heard, has not yet been clad as intended because work ceased when your officers requested the submission of the application. It may be that this currently unfinished element of the structure has led to the misunderstanding that this will remain open-sided, but once clad, no such overlooking could be achieved. There's also an allegation that the applicant has not complied with existing conditions at the site. Again, the applicant is not aware of any evidence to support this claim, and neither, it seems, are your officers, and so it's unclear where this concern has come from. But as your report points out, the enforceability of conditions is a matter that your officers have control over and can follow up on as and when required to do so. For the applicant's part, he is very much aware of the conditions and believes he operates within them. The parish has suggested a couple of extra conditions be added, but neither of these can be valid conditions as they require NFDC to do something rather than the applicant. But I think the general point they are making is that the conditions need to be monitored, and that's fair enough, and of course it's true of every permission granted. Overall then, there are no material differences between what you have before you today and what you approved in 2010. There are certainly no grounds for reaching a different decision, given that your planning officers, your environmental health officer, and indeed your conservation officer all have no objection to the development. Neither did the appeal inspector have any objection to any element of the previous scheme back in 2010. I would therefore ask that your permission be granted as set out in your report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Miss Jane Reid, you have 3 minutes to put your case. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. We are the only resident neighbour in around this yard, so there's only us to make any comments about this. We're objecting to the increase of height because this therefore means the increase of the business. In 2010, as we've discussed already, the site was approved planning to increase the racking system with certain conditions. Now in 24-25, yet again, we're having to object to the increase in some or the same racking system because of the impact it's having on the quality of our lives and the value of our home. The increase of the height, it overlooks our property and it is very visible. You will see that in the photos we have sent to you. The racking has no soundproofing. It never has had any soundproofing. This has never been enforced. This is the view in the photographs from our garden. Along with the floodlights, these are now higher, clearly visible. Intrusion to us, our privacy and enjoyment of our property. And when loading, etc., the staff are extremely visible to us as we can see them and they can see us and into our garden as they're that much higher up now. These conditions have never been hardly adhered to and there is no consideration to us, the neighbours. The lights are often left on all weekend and night. There's no soundproofing, no screening, no security. We ask you to take these points into consideration when making your decision. We've tried our utmost to put fences, hedges, the landy up. Unfortunately, they've raised the land and flooded our garden. Hence, all our trees, all our panels constantly fall down because they rot. There's nothing we can do to protect ourselves. The only protection we've got is from you, council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, please, members. Councillor Dowd.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I hear the comments from our officers on the lighting and acoustic issue. Again, this is one of those things that I think comes to enforcement. So I take the point raised earlier that the onus is on the district council to make sure that the conditions that have been imposed are put in place. From my own experience, when you're living near a building site, and we've been living near a building site now for about 3 or 4 years, there is, I'm afraid, inevitably creep in operation time. I'm absolutely astounded that the time considerations were from 7 o'clock rather than 8 o'clock through, and indeed 7 o'clock on a Saturday. So I think that alone, you know, if there is creep and things are happening earlier, things are happening outside that time, that will have a detrimental impact. So can we be sure, this is a question, can we be sure that there are, what I'm trying to think of the word I want, unplanned visits out to make sure that regulations that have been put down are actually adhered to? Thank you.
Chairman, if I can try and pick up that question, certainly we have planning enforcement resource. You're well aware that we have officers that are out and about inspecting sites around the district, and there's no reason why we can't include this on a regular set of site visits and monitoring. And I take your point about unplanned visits. I think that's appropriate, wholly appropriate, and I can undertake to do that for you. It's certainly not something, thinking of the verbal update from your case officer, that the parish council asked for it to be conditioned. That's wholly inappropriate, but we can certainly take it away as part of the ongoing enforcement work.
Sorry, can you explain, perhaps put up a plan showing the relationship between this and the neighbouring property? Because I'm concerned about the lighting. It doesn't seem to me to be any reason why there should be lights shining into their garden. It should be possible to design a scheme where that doesn't happen. So just wonder if you could explain it. Thank you.
Yeah, so as noted, this is the property in question here. So you can see here, just to give you some context from those photos earlier, they were taken standing here. So this was looking into that storage yard there, and then sort of sweeping around here towards this property over here. So you can see in this drawing, the proposed floodlighting is situated on the sort of frontage of this structure, in this location. And that's where you get these three things here. Obviously, the intention is to angle the lighting downwards, and this is that lighting display. As obviously observed, we have had discussions with our environmental health team about the relationship and how that works. They've raised no objection. There is a reasonably substantial setback and some screening between the properties, as noted, but obviously in the dark, light does carry. Obviously, the situation we've got here is we do have a lawful commercial use on the plot, and they obviously don't want to be working in the dark, which is understandable, but equally we do understand that there is a need to mitigate the impact on the nearby residential occupiers, which is why the condition to limit the hours of operation of the lighting is recommended. This was a condition that was previously reviewed by an inspector as part of the planning appeal, as noted. So we've just looked to reimpose the previous consent, the conditions on that consent. So the question before you really is, does the sort of increase in height have a substantive impact in that regard? As laid out in the report, we don't think it does.
Councillor Riley.
Yeah, I've gone past the site many, many times during the day, and these lights are on all day. I mean, I'm not saying that they're shown on their property, but on the entrance to it, there is light there 24/7. And I mean, that has got to be restricted, really. I mean, there's nothing been done about it. It's been on continuously. And I go by there many, many times. And I would like a restriction on that.
Sorry, do you want to?
Are the lights on all day?
One at the entrance is on,
Yeah, there's
and
one
at
in the
night
entrance.
that shines straight into our kitchen.
Your house is in Windwith Road,
Right, yeah.
so it backs onto the actual yard.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So does the light go towards your house or is it into the yard?
It goes to the one at the front, because it lights up, you can see that visibly from our house.
Yeah.
And the ones in the yard, they shine right up to the back, and the ones in that side, they light up. And because they leave them on all weekend, you don't know whether they've been burgled and the lights have been triggered on, or the fact that they're working there, we've got no idea. So when they leave the lights on, and they will, Friday night, those lights will still stay on till Monday morning, and sometimes they stay on continuously. It just depends on who remembers to turn them off, I guess.
Can we ask you to
Yeah,
respond?
Chair, I think we're talking about different lights. There are lights, the lights that have been referred to, I think, are the ones at the car parking area at the front, the gate. Those aren't part of this application, so we're talking about different lights.
Did you hear that? It's not part of this application, the lights that they're referring to. Okay. Sorry, I'll come back to you. Councillor Woods.
Can I ask the agent, can you remind me what complaints you've had in the past and how you've dealt with them?
Well, I asked the applicant the very same question, and the answer is that they were contacted by the council to say, have you been operating outside of your conditions? We've had a complaint that you have. And the applicant said, well, we haven't been operating outside our conditions. What evidence do you have has been put to you by the complainant as to the, to support that? And that was the last they heard from the council. So I'm assuming the council didn't have any evidence put to them by the applicants. So that's the position as we understand it.
So are you saying you've had zero complaints?
We haven't had any complaints. I'm saying that there's been no complaints that the council has followed up on to the point where the applicants had to do something about it. So in other words, the council, I don't think has had any evidence to support the complaints that were being made.
Can I ask you how many complaints you've had which you haven't followed up on?
None at all.
None at all.
None to the applicant, no.
Right, are there any more questions? Councillor Sleep.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. Looking at the plan views of the actual scaffold yard, how long has that scaffold yard been operating? How many years?
So the scaffolding yard has been operating for many, many years. As I said, it's the historic nature of the scaffolding yard predates many of the sort of planning regulations. Just to touch on some of the other points that have been raised as well, obviously just to focus the application specifically relates to just this structure. We don't have the condition, for example, on the lighting specifically relates to lights on this structure, not to other parts of the site. So because of the historic nature of the use, we don't necessarily have control over the sort of full remit of operations on the site. It's a case of what is lawful on the site, having been the historic use of the site over the passage of years. So that's where we are. The current application focuses specifically on just this structure, which is the elements of the proposal that we can control of this development.
Okay, the other question, if I may.
On page 20, you've got the history.
Yeah.
It goes back to 2005. Okay.
The other question, if I may, we've got a mobile home on site that's currently unoccupied. Could you show us that on the plan view, where that actually is?
So that's this bit here. That's in the intervening bit between the resident and the thing. Just to show you the photographs, that is this structure here.
Where is it? So, okay, right. Okay, so the access to that mobile home is through this scaffold yard entrance, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So do you have to take into account the safety aspect of people approaching that? At the moment it's unoccupied, but do you take it into account that you're going for an industrial yard to supply that access, and the safety implications that involves, because as a site, that is obviously a very busy site and lots of scaffolding coming in and out. How is it controlled as far as, or do we control that sort of safety issue?
To give some context for the mobile home, historically it was occupied by a sort of family friend of the owner and operator of the land, which is separate from the scaffolding company who don't own the site, they rent it out. We have had a recent lawful development certificate associated with the mobile home trying to certify its lawful use, which currently we have refused to issue. So currently our position is that there isn't a lawful use of the mobile home on that bit of land. So.
Okay, are there any more questions? We're going to debate them. Is there anything further that you wish to add? Councillor Dowd?
Yes, I think there are concerns I have. I mean, I am mindful of the fact that we've been assured by officers that it is in compliance of the things that have been raised. I'm just astounded that there's been such wide grant of opening times when we have people living nearby. So the other thing, I mean, we've been told it's not a planning issue, but that will be an environmental health issue, I believe, that if there are if there is lighting or noise that is causing measurable harm to residents. So I'm hoping that our environmental health department is looking into that and assisting those people who are impacted in making sure that they're able to log any infringements and any problems so that action can be taken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If nobody has anything more to say, Councillor Wade.
I just want to ask, forgive me for being a bit liberal with this, I want to ask a sort of question. Taking to the point that Councillor Dowd has made, do we as a planning department liaise with other departments and the district council where issues like this come up during a planning application? Because we should.
Chairman, yes. Page 21 of your report, part 8. You can see we've taken advice from the environmental health team in this particular case with regards to noise and lighting, and I certainly can advise you that when your enforcement officers are out and about and investigating sites, there's ongoing dialogue with other parts of the organisation where appropriate, so they do have that dialogue.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've got no problems with the actual permission for the building itself, only 4 inch higher. The concerns, I'm hoping that the actual side cladding and the rear cladding is obviously going to be much better than it's showing at the moment. Hopefully we'll take some of the noise problems away from the neighbours, but as in all companies, it depends on the operations of the staff that you've got working at that time. If someone's not following the rules that you've stipulated in your company, it's very difficult to police every single load that's coming in and out. It just depends on the guys that are working. So I sympathise with the neighbours, but you can only discipline your workforce to a certain level. I just hope the cladding on the actual shed will help with the soundproofing of it.
Thank you. Before I come back to the speakers, somebody will have, the recommendation is to grant. I will need a proposer and a seconder, but I will come back to the speakers. Mr Davis, you have 1 minute to reply.
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
And Miss Reid, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I mean, we're very much aware when we moved in this property, there was no scaffolding yard and it's come through by default. And given these conditions, which we are obviously pleased. One thing I'd like to say, obviously this is going to go through, but could the lights not be on a timer system? So at least we know they come in at the conditioned hours, maybe an hour leeway over. And we know on a Friday when they go out, that timer will go off at, say, I don't know, 7:30 or something. And they can't go back on again until someone presses that timer switch. At least that would alleviate our problem. We're just trying to ask for them to have some consideration to us, the neighbours. And the last thing we want to do is continually be ringing the council up saying, oh, the lights are on, the noise is on. We don't want to do it. That's why there's not been so many. We're fed up with it. We really are.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, we can't condition a timer,
I'm just,
but
would that not be a
hopefully
consideration?
the owner of the site, you can negotiate about this if it's possible to put timers onto them. Does seem to make sense, but it's not something we can condition. So I'm waiting now for a proposer and a seconder to grant this application. Is somebody going to propose? Councillor Sleep?
Defy my seconding, please. I'll second it based on the planning. Clearly, the residents have to complain to environmental health. And the point I made earlier to the officer was that if we identify, I know we check environmental health in the beginning, but if we identify a complaint in a planning meeting, do we pass that on, is what I meant. And I don't think I quite articulated that enough.
Right, we'll go to the vote. So the recommendation is to grant, subject to the conditions proposed by Councillor Sleep and seconded by Councillor Wade. All of those in favour, please raise your hands. 7. Against? 3. Abstentions? 1, 2. Okay, that has been granted then. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to.
Could I ask the officer a question?
Next application is on page 29 of your agenda, The Barn, Midland Road, Fording Bridge. Application number 24/10670. We have one speaker on this one, but we'll first go to the presentation. Thank you very much. Oh, did I have any interest on this? Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Chair. This application is at land off Midgham Road in Fording Bridge, and it comprises an agricultural building associated with a stabling and livery business at Highfield Farm. The proposal is for a change of use from the existing barn to residential dwelling. This is the red line plan, and this is the local context. The site is located outside of any defined settlement boundary and is within the open countryside. It's within a remote and highly unsustainable location, which is not within close proximity to any villages, towns or settlements. This slide shows the aerial imagery. The building is located to the east of Midgham Road, which is a single track road with limited passing places and no pavements. The building occupies a highly prominent position on Midgham Road and is visible from long-ranging public vantage points to the north and the south of Midgham Road. The applicant owns a mixed-use equestrian and agricultural facility which spans both sides of Midgham Road. For context on the wider site, this is a detached 7-bedroom dwelling in the applicant's ownership, which has 2 detached outbuildings to the south, one of which has ancillary accommodation in the first floor. To the south of the dwelling and to the east of Midgham Road, these various buildings associated with the equestrian and agricultural business, and there's a menage further to the south of the site. This is the location plan showing the site in the red line boundary and a small area of the applicant's overall land holding in the blue line. The site has a long and complex planning history, which will be set out in the following slides so members can understand how the site has evolved over time. Prior to this structure shown here, there was a low-key and modest barn in this location that was damaged during a storm. This structure here was constructed without the required express planning consent to replace the damaged barn, but it was replaced at a much larger scale and size than the barn that was previously there. An application was received in 2010 to regularise the structure and complete the barn as shown in these plans. However, this application was withdrawn following concerns raised by the officer regarding the scale of the barn and a lack of agricultural justification provided for the proposal, with most of the farm being used for horse-related activities at that time, and equestrian does not fall under agricultural definition. This shows photographs taken in 2012 with the structure remaining unchanged from when it was built without consent. These photos show the prominence and visibility of the building when viewed from Midgham Road. An application was then submitted in 2013 using the same plans from the withdrawn application in 2010. The proposal sought to add horizontal timber cladding and corrugated fibre cement sheet roof. This application was refused by the council as officers were not satisfied that the barn would be used for agriculture. An appeal was lodged and this was allowed, with the inspector finding the site was within a mixed use of an equestrian and agricultural facility, and they were satisfied that the agricultural justification supported the equestrian activities on the site. And these photos are taken in 2013, the barn remaining unchanged. A further application was submitted in 2020 to add brick walls to the open-sided structure, with 2 openings proposed at first floor level and ground floor double doors. It also had a steel profiled roof, and this application was approved. These photos are from the 2020 application, showing the barn was still open-sided at that time. These photos were taken in 2023. The bricking up of the building wasn't carried out in accordance with the approved plans just shown, and 30 openings were added to the building instead, as well as decorative brick headers above all of the openings, which are not typical for agricultural buildings and are rather typical of domestic dwellings. The roof of the building was tiled instead of the steel profile, with white UPVC fascia and soffits and rainwater goods, which again are typical of a domestic dwelling and wouldn't characteristically be used in an agricultural building. This slide shows a comparison of the plans as approved and the building as built. Typically, agricultural buildings may have 2 openings for airflow when storing hay, as was approved, and these openings here. But 30 openings wouldn't be necessary for an agricultural building. These alterations materially altered the appearance of the building, domesticating it, and were evidently designed to facilitate a residential use of the building. An application was then made in 2023 under Class Q of the Permitted Development Order for the conversion of the barn to a 4-bedroom residential dwelling. This application was refused as the proposal failed to meet the provisions of Class Q. A further application shown here was submitted to regularise the unauthorised works. This application was refused on the grounds of the appearance of the barn being of a domestic appearance rather than agricultural, and its resultant harmful impacts upon the character of this sensitive countryside location. An enforcement notice was subsequently served on the building, which required the UPVC rainwater goods to be removed and the window openings to be blocked up, as well as the tiled roof to be removed. The enforcement notice was amended to allow the tiles to the roof to remain, and the notice was considered to be complied with. But as you can see here, the blocking up of the openings has been quite poorly implemented. The new bricks haven't been toothed into the existing brickwork. The bricks don't match the existing, and the outlines of the openings are still highly visible. Now moving on to the proposal, this is the existing site layout plan, which shows the two existing accesses into the site, as well as the existing stables and pole barn. Submitted planning statement sets out that the barn is still in use for agriculture. The barn forms part of a complex, and the access is regularly used by horse riders who stable their horses at the site. The proposed site layout plan shows the pole barn is proposed to be demolished. The stables are proposed to be partially demolished, with 2 stable bays being retained. A large area of gravel driveway equating to 140 square metres is proposed to the south of the dwelling, with room for at least 7 vehicles. In terms of the principle of development in the countryside, the proposal is contrary to policy, which restricts development in the countryside unless it meets very specific criteria in both local and national planning policy. The proposal does not accord with any of these exception criteria as set out in the officer report. The proposed site area of the dwelling extends to 1,215 square metres, which is a significant encroachment and domestication of the countryside, which is contrary to policy. The Town Council have raised a strong objection to the proposal, stating it does not accord with the development plan and it would result in an isolated dwelling in the countryside. These are the existing elevations and the existing floor plans. These are the proposed elevations, which are the same as submitted in the Class Q application. The Council's residential design guide for rural areas sets out the guidance for rural design, which seeks to protect the character and appearance of the countryside. Its specific guidance on the conversion of buildings within the countryside makes clear that conversions should demonstrate minimal and subtle change. Car parking and residential external subdivision should be kept low-key. Encroachment and expansion of domestic curtilage is not permitted, and materials and details should avoid ornament or pretension. In this respect, the proposal fails to meet any of these criteria. The proposed external alterations are significant and ornamental, with an extensive amount of glazing equating to 30 openings, and the unauthorised works have resulted in significant constraints to the design of the dwelling. The resultant dwelling would be of a suburban and highly domestic appearance, with the building appearing of an inappropriately grand appearance, which is considered to be unsympathetic and intrusive within such a prominent and visible countryside location. This would be harmful to the visual amenities of the countryside, which is contrary to local and national policy, and the Town Council have raised a strong objection to the domesticated appearance of the dwelling and have recommended non-delegated refusal of the application. These are the floor plans showing the extent of the accommodation proposed for the dwelling. All 4 bedrooms have en-suites with ground floor accommodation comprising a sitting room, snug, boot room, kitchen dining room and cloakroom with downstairs toilet. This is the existing pole barn, which is proposed to be demolished. And these are the existing stables, which are proposed to be partially demolished. And these plans show the stables, which are proposed to be retained, relatively modest. The proposal is considered to result in an intrusive and unacceptable form of residential development in the countryside, being of a contextually inappropriate design and an extensive and excessive domestic curtilage, which would erode the countryside when no exception tests have been met. The Town Council have raised a strong objection to the proposal. The proposal would be contrary to policies ENV1, ENV3, ENV4, STR1, STR2 and STR3 of the Local Plan Part 1. as well as policies DM20, DM21 of the Local Plan Part 2, the Council's Residential Design Guide and the MPPF, and the proposal is therefore recommended for refusal for the reasons as detailed in the officer report. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Carey Crutchfield, you have 3 minutes, please, to put your case forward.
Thank you. The proposal is to convert the existing barn to a dwelling. The existing barn already has brick walls and a tiled roof. Therefore, the only changes proposed to the external appearance of the building are new window and door openings. Apart from the Town Council, there are no other public or consultee objections. The officer's report sets out the planning history of the site. It's acknowledged that some unauthorised works had occurred. However, changes have been made and the building is now lawful. The proposal would improve the appearance of the building and would make good use of an existing building to provide a new home. The applicant previously applied to convert the barn to a dwelling under Class Q. Previous agricultural permitted development carried out meant that Class Q could not be utilised. The Class Q application was refused on this technicality only, and hence the reason for this current planning application for the conversion instead. The Class Q application was not refused on design grounds. This planning application has therefore used the same design. Therefore, we consider that the design reason for refusal is not reasonable. The proposal fits in well with the varied character of development in the local area. The applicant has improved the character of the area since the purchase of the land through high quality building, including Lansdowne House, and a significant amount of new tree and hedge planting. The proposed development would be built to the same high quality standard. The council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. The latest statement sets out a supply of just over 3 years. However, the supply will be less than this given the new standard method in the recently revised MPPF, which doubles the housing requirement for the council. Therefore, the tilted balance applies, i.e. planning permission should be granted unless the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. In this case, the conflict with the spatial strategy for housing in the local plan would not significantly or demonstrably outweigh the clear benefit of providing a new dwelling in the context of a significant housing land supply deficit. To conclude, this is a good site to help towards addressing the housing supply deficit whilst making good use of an existing building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, members, please. Councillor Dowd.
Thank you. Can I ask the officer, have the applicants discussed what permissible developments are possible? I'm sympathetic to the fact that we can't preserve the countryside in Aspic. It has to work, and obviously people have got to think about how they can make best use of the land they've got. But given that this isn't really a housing site, has there been any approach to see how it can be used to develop it in a way that is conducive to the agricultural nature of the building?
The only applications or pre-applications we've received relate to the scheme that's proposed. So there hasn't been an alternative use proposed for it.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Cressell.
Message to the agent. Has there ever been a discussion about trying to make it look more like a converted barn, like most people do, so that it would fit in with the surrounding area? Or is it, they seem to be fixated on this type of building, and they keep on coming back with the same answers. So I just wonder why they haven't thought out of the box a bit more.
Well, we think this design is acceptable, and given the previous Class Q application wasn't refused on design, we took that the council thought that the design was acceptable, so therefore put the same one forward. Just to reiterate, it already has brick walls and a tiled roof, so it is just the window and door openings that we're proposing.
Councillor Wade?
A question for the officers, actually. I'm reflecting back on rules regarding agricultural conversions, and my understanding, very, not heavily detailed this, but you're allowed to convert an agricultural building, is it to another building for the use of industries, is perhaps the wrong word, for business use. But are there any rules about converting them to residential properties? What is the actual restrictions on that? If we could make it clear, because I know it's against our policies, I understand that. But I wondered if the national restrictions on conversion of agricultural buildings to residential properties.
So any development has to be in local and national policy sympathetic to its character, local character of the area. The council's rural design guide for residential development does set out quite clear specific criteria on conversions, that they must be very subtle. There is an expectation that a building would retain its agricultural roots and its appearance. Obviously the proposal that we have before us, there's no reference to agricultural roots. It's of a very grand appearance. Very much stately home-esque type development, which is not something that would be expected in terms of it retaining a sympathetic appearance for its rural location.
Councillor Sleep.
Yes, thank you, Chair, to the officer. So the first building that was put up in 2009 was a steel pole H structure and roof. And that was put up illegally because it didn't have planning permission. It replaced a barn that was smaller or something, did it?
Yeah, so there was previously a barn there. We do accept that. It was a more low-key, modest structure.
So that's a bigger footprint that was put in?
Yeah, so my understanding, it may have been an accident. The applicant replaced the barn as this structure before you here. It is at a much larger scale and size
and that was
than
in
what was there.
2009?
I believe so, yes. I think that was when it first came to the council's attention. I'm not sure exactly when the barn was damaged.
Any more questions? Okay, we'll go into debate. Councillor Hawkins.
This strikes me as another we're doing it our way and not your way. There are rules and these rules haven't been followed. So therefore I propose that this should be refused and demolished.
Councillor Dowd.
Thank you. I understand that we do need housing, but also we have areas that are defined areas, and I think the more pressure we have on housing, the more important we need to consider the other lands that's within the district. This is agricultural land. My understanding is there are other uses that could be used for this without destroying its agricultural nature. This is an example of creep, and I think it should be strongly contested. I don't think what's proposed is in keeping. I don't think it's the best use of an agricultural building, so I will not be supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to say? Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, we've got rules, regulations, or we wouldn't be a planning authority, would we? And clearly this has gone against them. So it really is a bit of a no-brainer that we should support the refusal, because we have to protect our environment and we have to follow the rules we set to protect that. So it's a no-brainer.
Does anybody else have anything to say? Do I assume, Councillor Hawkins, that you are proposing that we refuse?
Yes.
Okay, and I will need a seconder. Thank you. I will now come back to the applicant. You have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, the existing building as it stands now is lawful. The changes are fairly minor. We're just putting in new windows and doors. This is going to improve the appearance of the current lawful building. It will make good use of an existing building to provide a new home in the context of a significant housing land supply deficit. Again, to reiterate, the previous Class Q application for the same form of development was only refused because agricultural permitted development had previously been carried out and was not refused on design grounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, the recommendation is to refuse, and that has been proposed by Councillor Hawkins, seconded by Councillor Riley. All of those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Sorry. We'll take a break. If you can be back in the council chamber at 10 to 11. Thank you very much. Sorry. Our next application is New House Marketplace, 1 to 3 Stride Lane, Ringwood. That's application number 23/10821, and you'll find this on page 53 of your agenda. We've also had a really long update, so I hope you've all read it. If not, can you let me know, because Vivian will have the job of reading it all out again. You've all looked at it. No, not everybody has, so it's up to you. We have Mr. Matt Holmes on behalf of the applicant and Councillor Philip Day. You both have 3 minutes after the presentation. So if you'd like to go ahead, please, Vivian.
Thank you, Chair. Just starting with the update then relating to the 5-year housing land supply. In determining planning applications, there is a presumption in favour of the policies of the extant development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Material considerations include the National Planning Policy Framework. NPPF paragraph 11 clarifies what is meant by the presumption in favour of sustainable development. It states that for decision making, it means approving development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan without delay, or where there are no relevant development plan policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, granting permission unless the application of policies in the framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a strong reason for refusing the development proposed, or any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole, having particular regard to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes individually or in combination. Footnote 8 of the NPPF clarifies that this includes, for applications involving the provision of housing, situations where the local planning authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites with the appropriate buffer as set out in paragraph 78, or where the housing delivery test indicates that the delivery of housing was substantially below the housing requirement over the previous 3 years. NFDC cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing land supply. In such circumstances, paragraph 11D of the NPPF is engaged. It is considered that in this case, the development must be considered in accordance with NPPF paragraph 11D. Taking the first limb of this paragraph, as the report sets out, in this case, there are specific policies in the NPPF which protect areas of assets of particular importance referred to within footnote 7 of the NPPF. This includes areas at risk of flooding. Therefore, a judgment needs to be reached as to whether policies in the framework provide a strong reason for refusing the development. Where this is found to be the case, the development should be refused. The second limb of paragraph 11D, namely whether the adverse impacts of granting planning permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the NPPF taken as a whole, the so-called tilted balance, will only apply if it is judged that there are no strong reasons for refusing the development, having applied the test at limb 1. The 2024 NPPF requires particular regard to be had to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes individually or in combination when applying the said tilted balance. In this case, the location of the site in flood zones 2 and 3, coupled with the lack of a sequential test, means that there is a strong reason for refusal of the application under Lim 1 of paragraph 11D of the NPPF. As such, the tilted balance in paragraph 11D2 is not considered to be engaged, and rather the application can be considered against the straight balance as an assessment against the policies of the development unless there are other material considerations that indicate otherwise. This assessment is undertaken in the main agenda report. Thank you. So, moving on now to the presentation. Here we have the site situated just in the southeast corner of Marketplace in Ringwood. And the wider context right on the edge of the town, close to the A31 there. Now here's the flood map, which shows the darker blue area is flood zone 3 and the lighter blue area is flood zone 2. So you can see that there's an area quite close to the site which is outside of that area where there are several residential properties, both the L-shaped building to the south of the site there has been there for some time, and there is a new development that's recently been, it's nearing completion now, just opposite this site as well. You can see there a little more clearly, this is the development site where 6 houses have just been built, and we have a block of flats just to the south here. So this is the main frontage building and the outbuilding to be extended and converted, lying to the western side of the site. So that just provides a bit more detail with the additional floor proposed in that location, set back from the Strides Lane boundary. And a bit more detail as to how they're proposing to lay out the courtyard, which currently can accommodate 7 or 8 vehicles, albeit a little bit tightly. But here you can see they're showing 6 spaces, and there is a bit of space for landscaping and a bin collection point at the bottom here. So the photographs, this is taken from the rear of the outbuilding, and the first photograph shows the location where the small lean-to additions would be going, on the back wall here and wrapping around the corner to the side elevation. It's a bit of a scrubby area. There is a small tree that you can see in the photographs there, but it's not considered to be a material constraint to the development. And photographs at the front of the building, taken a couple of years earlier when I was dealing with a separate application for the site, which hasn't been implemented at this stage, that show some of the unattractive windows in that particular building. So here we have the floor plans at the upper levels. The darker section would be retained as offices on, as well as the ground, but on the first and second floors as well. The lighter areas show 3 flats on each floor, and then you can see the first floor of the outbuilding converted to an ensuite bedroom there. The upper floor that would be proposed, 2 one-bed units at the top here, set well back from the Strides Lane elevation and set quite a way back from the West Street elevation there as well. The pink dotted lines that you'll see on some of the other drawings as well indicate the scheme that was submitted originally and how it's been reduced in size to deal with issues raised over the course of the application. So here we have the elevation to Strides Lane. So we've got the front elevation of the outbuilding. Again, you can see where the original scheme that was submitted had a 2-story extension that has now been reduced to this lean-to that wraps around the corner. And you can see the setback of the pavilion, if you like, on the top of the existing building. So it's set back quite away from the main West Street Marketplace frontage. And that's just what the existing building looks like from Strides Lane at the present time. So it's not the most attractive building. So the front elevation, this is obviously drawn as a true elevation, but in reality, I don't think the pavilion at the top there is going to be as visible. You can see from the photograph taken from across the road, the angle is such that you will see it, but it's not going to be as tall as the drawing might indicate. You can also see the row of shops at the ground floor, which are all proposed to be retained with new shop fronts, but still recessed. So the side elevation from the West Street angle, you can see the rear of the outbuilding there with its small lean-to addition. And again, you can see the setback of the pavilion from the frontage. And that's the view from the rear, which is a more streamlined approach to the situation that exists in this photograph, where you can see air conditioning units and lots of metal fire escape staircases. The windows will also be realigned so there's more of a rhythm to that rear elevation. Excuse the finger in the top corner. So here we have a photograph that I took on the left-hand side, and the architects have provided a CGI image of the proposed scheme on the right-hand side there, which shows the improvements to the existing building, and obviously the pavilion at the top. So you can see that a lot of it is recessed behind that parapet wall. From West Street looking towards the site, photograph on the left, and admittedly it's not exactly the same location, but I'm going to try and point out this grey area here is the pavilion additional floor. That's all that you would see from that angle. So the recommendation is the proposal is considered to offer an acceptable solution in design terms to the refurbishment and alteration of these buildings within the conservation area, and would provide 9 dwellings in a sustainable location. However, in view of the lack of a sequential test for a proposal which requires this to be considered, refusal must be recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come to Mr. Matt Holmes. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this application seeks permission for the partial change of use of new house to residential and a roof extension to create 2 flats. The application was submitted following pre-application discussions and is set out in the officer report. The plans have been amended during the course of the application to respond to feedback received. The application site is centrally located within the built-up area of Ringwood. It is a highly accessible site and therefore one where the provision of new homes is considered acceptable as a matter of principle. The architect was very careful when designing the scheme to ensure that the proposals would respond positively to the character of the area, and amendments have been made in positive response to feedback received. We are pleased to note the conclusion in the officer's report that the design of the proposals are acceptable. We note in particular the comments that the changes to the fenestration and facade of the existing building will enhance its character, and that the alterations to the rear single-storey building will have a positive impact on that non-designated heritage asset. The Council's relevant design criteria have been taken into account in that the homes all meet or exceed the relevant minimum space standards. The density of development is appropriate having regard to the location of the site, and the scheme includes for the retention of a commercial use in part of the building. In terms of neighbour impact, that the proposals are for the most part the conversion of the existing building means that the impact on nearby homes are limited, and the officer's report concludes that there are no residential amenity objections to the proposals. We are also pleased to note that your highways and ecology officers raised no objections to the proposals either. Members, one substantive reason for refusal has been suggested by the planning officer, that being the absence of a sequential test. To be clear, and as is noted in your officer's report, national planning policy does not require sequential tests to be undertaken for changes of use. And therefore, in this case, it is primarily the new top floor flats that trigger the requirement for a sequential test. Obviously, those flats are far above the future flood level and are therefore safe from risk from flooding as a point of fact. Nevertheless, we acknowledge that technically the inclusion of those top floor flats does engage the requirement for a sequential test as per national planning policy. The question of a sequential test was raised somewhat late in the application process, and we note that the officer's report raises no technical concerns with the proposals in flood risk terms other than for the absence of the sequential test. Therefore, I would request that the committee defer this application to allow the applicants either to provide a sequential test or to allow them to amend the plans to remove the top floor, plus make any other necessary arrangements. Doing so will remove the sequential test objection and also address much, if not all, of the Town Council comments. The scheme carries with it multiple benefits, as explained in your officer's report,
which includes new housing delivery, the enhancement of the facade of the building, and the improvement of the non-designated heritage asset. And deferral of the application to allow changes to be made will enable those benefits to be realised without further delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Philip Day, 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am, and good morning, everybody. You may well be wondering why the Town Council is here today. We recommended refusal of the application, and your officers have indeed recommended refusal, so frankly, why we bothered. We entirely agree and accept the officer's recommendation to refuse on grounds that admittedly we as a Town Council did not include in our objections, so thank you for that. However, we consider that the grounds for refusal, particularly the sequential test, could easily be overcome by the applicant, either on appeal or submission of a new application, or as has just been suggested, by deferring the application. Our objection and that of Ringwood Society centre around the construction or addition of the further storey to the building. We note that the officers disagree with us, and if you accept that view, you not only set a precedent for future applications within Ringwood Town Centre, but also grant an application that is in fact contrary to policy. To use a word much favoured by our King, this building is a carbuncle in the middle of Ringwood's historic marketplace. We appreciate that the proposal might do something to enhance the outward appearance of the building, but the benefit that might bring falls a long way short of compensating for the damage that would be caused to the historic centre of the town by the construction of a four-storey building that would tower above anything else in the town centre, let alone the marketplace. We find it surprising, given the views expressed by your conservation officers with regard to other applications in the immediate vicinity, including in particular 1 to 7 Meeting House Lane, which is tucked round the corner and out of the way, where an additional storey was refused, and also comments with regard to other listed buildings within the locality. So as set out in our objection, the application falls foul of the following policies: Ringwood Neighbourhood Plan Policy R7, the Design Code, the Ringwood Local Distinctiveness Plan SPD, and the Ringwood Conservation Area SPG, and that is by virtue of its bulk, height, design, and location in the conservation area in close proximity to listed buildings in West Street, the marketplace itself, and of course our historic church. Further, the application now does not address Ringwood Policy R10 regarding sustainable development, in that the proposal does not accord with Passive House standards, nor has any assessment been provided as to justifying departure from that policy. So we urge you, therefore, not only to refuse the application on the grounds that the officer has recommended, but to include in your reasons those advanced by Ringwood Society and the Town Council regarding that top storey. We're here to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you very much for your attention, members.
Right on time. Thank you. Right. Questions then, please. Nobody's got any questions? Councillor Hawkins.
My concern is it's in a floodplain. I know it's only in 2, and those people living higher aren't going to get wet, but they're going to get wet getting to the place and leaving it. So I think we ought to refrain from putting the people of our good town in jeopardy. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to say? Yeah, we're going to debate. Thank you. Councillor Dowd.
It's January, isn't it? We're back into training again. I'm very mindful of the comments in the neighbourhood plan. I think it's really important that when we have conservation areas, that we actually, if you've got a policy to do that, it's got to be for something. My concern with the additional development is that it is out of keeping. It's my own bugbear of having a flat roof in a wet country, which just seems madness to me. But it is the imposing nature of that building on a conservation area. So I'm mindful of the fact that we can move some way with deferral, as long as that deferral includes consideration of removing that top floor, because I think I agree with the comments that actually the improvements to the existing external building do make a lot of sense. So I'm mindful to go down the deferral route if it satisfies those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woods.
I agree with some of what Councillor Dowd says, but I don't agree with him on the referral issue, because certainly it doesn't comply with the Ringwood Neighbourhood Plan, and they worked hard to put that neighbourhood plan into position. They got a majority vote in favour of it, and if we're in favour of democracy, we should try and follow the policies that were instigated with the neighbourhood plan. So I would certainly support their view of refusal.
Thank you. The refusals, of course, are different. The refusals from Ringwood Town Council are not the refusals that NFDC have given. Okay. Does anybody else have anything to say? Councillor Sleep.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the photograph views, I've got to say that the roof extension isn't going to be oppressive in my mind. And on the back view of the properties, the changes that were possibly imposed there would have been a tremendous improvement if that was tidied up. But I understand we always look to see what the town and parish have to say. And I understand exactly their feelings on it, and I defer to them. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Yeah, Chairman, I understand actually the point that has been made about defending the local plan of Ringwood, because if you don't defend it, what's the point of having them? And I can understand that, and I have a lot of sympathy for that view. But if we were to object on just the reasons here, the sequential test, because the developers requested a deferral to do the sequential test, does that mean that an appeal will be winging its way quickly and speedily towards us in this context? I'm just looking at this from a process of what we should really refuse it on to get the right result.
If the application is deferred today, then we would go back to the developer and say, okay, you need to make some changes. Either, I mean, I don't think that they would be able to pass the sequential test with the scheme that's in front of you today. But if they're willing to make changes where the sequential test isn't required, i.e., so the only residential is in the conversion of buildings. So we've got the new flats on the top floor, they would need to be removed. And I think there may need to be some changes to the outbuilding as well, which currently includes additional built form. So if the outbuilding were able to be converted into a dwelling without the need for extension, then in broad principle terms, then those are the changes that we would be looking at, and then we would bring the application back to committee. But with a scheme that's so substantially different to the scheme in front of you today, we would obviously have to go out to reconsultation and seek further advice from the Conservation Officer with those changes.
Listening to what you said, which is quite detailed, taking that into account and the objections from Ringwood about their neighbourhood plan, then we should refuse it.
Could I just come in and just point out on page 59 of my report, I have, at the time of writing the report, I did look quite closely at policy R7 of the Ringwood Neighbourhood Plan, and there are some bullet points on that page which clearly state that the proposal doesn't conflict with several of the design codes referred to in that design, the appendix of the Ringwood Neighbourhood Plan. So I would just point that out to you. I don't feel that it is contrary to that policy on that basis.
I don't think there's any merit in deferring this. We need to make a decision on what we got in front of us. Councillor Crizell.
I propose that we refuse.
If nobody else, sorry, Councillor Woods.
As you said to me, can I make a proposal on refusal of the grounds of the Historical Society and the Town Council?
No, you refuse on the application you've got in front of you, and the refusal's given as the case officer has put in the report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll come back then to Mr. Matt Holmes. You have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing particular to add. I would re-encourage the committee to consider deferring the application. We know there's a need for housing. We know this is an appropriate location for housing. So the sooner it can be provided is to everyone's benefit. Thank you.
Mr. Philip Day, Councillor Philip Day, 1 minute.
Thank you. You do have to give reasons for refusal, and it's not just the Ringwood Neighbourhood Plan here. It's also the Ringwood Local Distinctiveness Plan, SPD, and the Ringwood Conservation Area, SPG, as well. If an application were to come back without that additional story, then I would be very surprised if my colleagues at Ringwood Town Council would raise any objection to this application. It's that's our problem and bugbear. It would set a very nasty precedent. It would be the only full-storey building in the town centre.
That hasn't happened. That's not part of this report, and that's not what we're voting on. So we'll go to the vote, which the recommendation is to refuse. So that has been proposed by Councillor Crizell and seconded by Councillor Wade. All of those in favour, please raise your hands. 10. Against? 2. So that has been refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go on to our last application now, which is on page 69 of your agenda. The barn at the Old Stores, Scats Lane, Sandal Heath. This is application number 24/10820. Mr. Andrew Rickman, the applicant, will have 3 minutes to speak. Councillor Janet Richards, you will move. Oh, you're there, sorry. And you will speak as a district councillor. Thank you. So we'll go ahead with their presentation and thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, proposal to convert the barn at the old stores to a tourism use. Red line there showing the application site extending to the south to access Older Holt Road. The building shown, the footprint there, existing residential properties around the area at the edge of Sandal Heath. A little bit more context, showing it in the context of Sandal Heath as a settlement and the farmland and countryside, predominantly to the south of the site, and beyond the residential properties on Older Holt to the west. Aerial photo showing you the setting, the context, obviously the residential properties and their gardens set out to the north and to the west, and others on the edge of the aerial photo there to the east. And then the fields dropping down the hillside there to the south. An important element to factor into the context is the alignment of the built-up area of Sandal Heath, the black line there showing you the boundary of Sandal Heath as a built-up area. You can see it's tight to the rear of some of the properties, and the old stores being the address to which this building relates. Many of these have got gardens that extend beyond that built-up area, which is not uncommon, but in terms of setting the context and the proximity of the sites to the existing built-up area, I think it's important to assess and appreciate that relationship. And as such, the site isn't as rurally located as others you may have seen, and especially one that I brought to this committee a couple of cycles ago, that was in the national landscape to the west of this site. As I said, the site relates to the old stores, as you hear that in the address. That's the building there on Scats Lane. The applicant owns the land, shown in blue, and the application site then outlined in red, as you've seen on the previous slides. Just give you a context of the land to which he owns and how it relates to the existing property. So looking at the actual setting and context of the building, there's the existing building proposed for conversion, sitting on the agricultural land surrounding it. And there you can see the residential properties relatively close as a backdrop and in the context. They're gardens that have extended beyond the built-up area, being the boundary edge of the fields that the applicant owns. So as I say, the application is to convert this building, so its appearance will not change, nor will it become any larger. Will there be any other alterations to its context in respect of the landscape setting? Rear of the existing building in the context that it sits, and then the access arrangements that are currently shared with neighbouring landowners who own other elements of the fields around the site. So access to the site would be across this wood chip area, through that gate, and then through the gate in the distance there. Improvements will be made to that surface once you get beyond that gateway in order to ensure it's more robust and resilient for the use that's proposed. Access out onto Older Holt Road is existing. Visibility is sufficient up and down the road. It's wide enough for the types of vehicles that will be using it. And as you can see, there's no impediment to accessing it by way of gates immediately on the edge of the carriageway, or that would require visitors to stop and get out of the vehicle to open a gate to get off the highway. You see the extent of screening on the opposite side of the road. Concerns were raised by residents regarding the headlights of vehicles shining into properties and interrupting or harming amenity. You can see if any vehicles are exiting this site, the majority of the light would be against that hedge, and amenity would not be affected. And in any event, a single bred unit will not generate a significant amount of traffic that would cause headlights to be shining into windows on a regular or common basis. As I said, the views up and down the road are good. It's on the outside of a bend, so there's sufficient visibility on the immediate edge of the road, and obviously no other hedgerow gateway fences that would obscure any visibility in the future. As I said, the proposal includes improvements to the access track to make it more resilient. You can see here the context and siting of the building in respect to the access track that is existing and has been there to serve the existing use for the applicant, but is in need of some maintenance and restoration to be more resilient for the proposed use. Those changes would not change the character of the site or the access, and will only be benefit for the existing user and any of the neighbouring landowners. Looking at the physical changes to the building to facilitate the change, the conversion, the two barn doors are already existing. Proposals to put glazing inside those doors is entirely reasonable and acceptable within the fabric of the building. Not material significantly change its appearance, with those doors being capable of being retained. And then small minor openings on two other elevations and a door on the third. So in respect of physical alterations to the elevations, they're very minor. Won't change the scale of the building or significantly change its appearance. Solar panels are proposed on the roof slope, entirely sensible and a reasonable addition, and something that could be added to an agricultural building or wouldn't have a significant impact on the character of the building in its current use in any event. I said it was a single bedroom unit. There you can see the floor plan, pretty basic. Doorway going in on the side, those opening doors on the front with the glazing inside, and an additional window serving that bedroom and one for the shower room. All relatively minor alterations, and all within the fabric of the building as existing. Single car parking space and an area outside the building would be provided. Entirely appropriate for the scale of the development, sufficient to meet its parking and access needs, and wouldn't have a significant material impact on the wider character and appearance of the area. So, drawing showing the proposed elevation there, with one of the photos showing the existing building, you get a sense of how minor the changes would be. I mean, the predominant issue here for you to consider is obviously the conversion to a tourism use of a building in the open countryside. Now, obviously, the policies in the local plan do try and limit the opportunities and extent of development that goes on outside of the built-up areas, but does recognise that to some extent development will occur outside the built-up areas, and it can be supported in certain circumstances. And one of those is the conversion of existing buildings to tourism uses or employment uses. The local plan recognises that tourism is one of our primary economic industries, and as such, there are benefits associated with the proposal. That being the economic investment in the building, but also the spend of visitors in the local area, local villages, and Fordingbridge, the nearest town. Those benefits don't arrive from the existing use, and are benefits that weigh in support of the scheme. So as I say, there is the presumption against development in the countryside, but policies do allow for appropriate development in rural areas, especially where that's converting an existing building. The minor economic benefits weigh in support of the scheme, and there's no material considerations that weigh against it. As such, the principle of the development is acceptable in accordance with development plan policies. And the recommendation is that permission is granted, subject to deferral to the head of planning, to secure the Section 106 agreement for the necessary mitigation for the development and the conditions set out in your report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrew Rickman, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding this application. And thank you to the planning officers involved during both the pre-planning and planning processes, as I believe that the amendments requested that have been incorporated into the plan have improved the design and significantly reduced any negative impact whilst retaining the agricultural appearance. I also did note on the officer's report, pedestrian access being raised, and I agree it would be beneficial to have safe pedestrian access to the local shop, common and footpaths and countryside to Fordham Bridge. Therefore, I intend to facilitate this via the existing side field gate with a path alongside the house, exiting opposite the village allotments and onto the village green. So therefore, like I say, I'm taking that comment that's been made earlier in this report, sorry. In response to some of the comments raised online regarding the use of the barn, it was built and used to store my equipment needed to clear the rubbish in the overgrown areas, as the land had been unattended for many years. This is now done, and most of that machinery has been sold off, and the barn is no longer required, and the remaining equipment can be relocated in the shed near the house. I have considered other uses for the land, but believe the proposal of some diversification will allow the areas not included in this application of the land that I own to benefit nature, because I only need to cut the grass once a year, and that would be late in the year to allow for the butterflies. So unless you've got any questions, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Richards.
Thank you. Okay. The barn was given planning permission for agricultural purposes and was built only about 5 years ago. And since then, it does not appear to have been used for truly agricultural purposes. And now the barn is no longer needed, and so permission is being sought to change to residential use. Although the changes to the shed itself seem quite minor and quite sympathetic compared to a previous application we looked at this morning, the impact of this would also affect the land around it, since even with the suggested conditions, there'll be car parking, outdoor lighting, wheelie bins, and all the other things you might expect in a garden, like garden furniture, patios, etc., etc. And all of these would change the character of this agricultural land to be that of a domestic dwelling. Also, once residential use is granted, it opens the door for further applications for enlargements of the building. Our local plan draws a line round the built-up area of Sandal Heath to protect the countryside from uncontrolled sprawl. This application breaches that boundary, effectively extending the built-up area and opening the door for similar applications in the future. The application is being recommended for approval solely based on the benefit to tourism, but the benefit of a single holiday let to accommodate 2 people will be minimal. And we have seen from other applications that have come before this committee how easy it is for a holiday let condition to be removed. And in that case, there would be no benefit to tourism at all. Many Sandal Heath residents are concerned about this, as you will see from the number of objections that have been received. They're counting on you to protect the countryside and uphold the policies in our local plan. And so I urge you to vote to refuse this application.
Thank you very much. Can you both turn your mics off? Thank you. Questions, please. Councillor Hawkins.
Officer, what sanitation, well, what sewer, is there a septic tank in there to get rid of sewage and wastewater? Because I think at the moment it's got nothing. We need to make sure that that's accommodated, because otherwise it's going to damage the countryside.
Yes, you're quite right. There is a, well, the scheme proposes to install a biodigester septic tank scheme. So that will process on site the wastewater, and then any collection of whatever is residual will be undertaken as necessary.
Thank you.
The scheme will also need to deal with the nutrient neutrality anyway, but the use of the biodigester will obviously reduce the impact that it would have, and for the mitigation it will need to secure in addition to the use of that equipment.
Thank you. Councillor Wade.
Just a question. Is there going to be a boundary fence to this site? Well, I noticed obviously in the map is a site with the property in the middle, but won't that need to be sympathetic to the countryside? I mean, because I noticed there's no mention of any walling around it, or is it going to be left open plan, so to speak?
It's a reasonable question. In respect of should they choose to do so, we've a condition number 5, restricting PD or removing PD for certain classes, one of which is the means of enclosure. So whatever they would like to do, they will have to secure planning permission. So we'll have the opportunity to ensure anything is sympathetic to. I mean, of course, they could choose to leave it open as existing, but they're, you know, in respect of the site subject to this permission, the red line limits and the conditions limit what they could do within that red line anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Sleep.
A couple of questions, Chair. Historically, I understand Merryweather Estates tried to get this land for development and they were refused, and it was to be kept agricultural use. Is that the first historical fact that I'm aware of? Is that correct?
I think you're before my time, so I'm afraid I don't know. No, I am aware that I think it has either been promoted to us once in the long distant past. Okay. There is reference to appeal decisions on, I think, proposals perhaps for some residential development from maybe the 1990s. But certainly nothing in the short term in respect of the last rounds of the local plan that proposed that, and it's not designated, allocated for any form of development by our current local plan. So,
okay. The next question is: I understand the barn was approved as agricultural use. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any more questions? Then we'll go into debate. Anybody have anything to say? Councillor Dowd?
Yes, this is yet another one of those instances where we have to balance the use of a building that might, in other circumstances, fall into disrepair. We also have to think about whether or not, if it's not used for this, you know, the land may well be considered for housing at some later date. In terms of the sympathetic use of the building, I mean, it's pleasing to hear that engagement with officers has happened throughout the process, so that we could be sure that the best use of the building is in consideration. So I think it is a difficult one, but I think on balance, it seems to me that the wider use of that amenity space, open space, is best served by the building being a temporary used holiday home than not. So I'm in favour of accepting this one. Thank you.
Councillor Sleep.
I'd like to second that proposal that we accept.
Was that a proposal? It was, okay. If nobody else has anything to say, we'll come back. Did you want to say something? No? Okay. No? Okay, we'll come back to the speakers then. So, Mr. Rickman, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. This may be a case of where less is more. But what I would say, 5 years ago, I didn't own that house. It's my father's house. I came back from my work 2 years ago to care for him, but he's passed away. So now I do own the house. So therefore, I don't really need the barn as a barn. I can actually move that equipment onto the shed. So that's the reason why now, 5 years later, that barn isn't really needed as the barn itself. And I hear what you say about the residents, and they obviously, but you know, I've listened to them, we've engaged with them, and yeah, but thank you very much. That's what I've got to say.
Councillor Richards.
Well, I'd just like to say that, you know, planning, these decisions are always a balance between the harms and the benefit. In this case, the harm is the erosion of the settlement boundary and the encouragement of creep out into the open countryside, whereas the harm seems, whereas the benefit seems really minor in terms of its contribution to tourism, being only a cottage for 2 people. And so, in my view, the harm outweighs the benefit in this case, and so it should be refused.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the vote. So the proposal is to grant to the service manager, that was the recommendation, proposed by Councillor Dowd, seconded by Councillor Cressell. All of those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, can we take that vote again? Those in favour, please raise your hands. Those against? 3. Any abstentions? Oh, no, you're not voting. Okay, so that has been granted. Thank you all. That concludes the meeting. Thank you all very much.